Have you ever thought about whether a story can be more than just, a story? Could it actually be a tool? Maybe even a weapon? A blueprint for changing the entire world? Well, that's what we're diving into today, the story of Marxist literary theory. It's this incredibly powerful and, often controversial way of seeing how art, money, and politics are all tangled up together. And really, this is the big question, isn't it? At the heart of it all. Marxist theory says absolutely, yes. It argues that culture, everything from revolutionary books to the movies we watch today, isn't just a mirror reflecting society. No, it's a battleground. It's where the fight for ideas happens and where power is ultimately won or lost. So here's our roadmap. We're going to trace this whole idea from its raw beginnings with Marx and Engels right through the fire of the Russian Revolution and into these really complex debates that, believe it or not, still shape how we talk about art today. All right, let's get into it. Okay, so first things first. It's super important to understand that Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels never actually sat down and wrote one big book called Our Theory of Art. It just didn't happen. What they did leave behind was a trail of clues, these incredibly powerful ideas. You can think of them as core predispositions that became the raw materials for everything that came later. And what's so wild about this framework is how it yanks art right down to earth. The big idea here is that a painting or a novel isn't some magical thing floating in a vacuum. Nope, it's a product, just like anything else. And it's shaped by money, by class, by ideology. The theory even says the very language we use to tell stories is tied to our real material lives. I mean, that was a radical idea, that art isn't outside the system, it's a fundamental part of it.
So you've got these foundational ideas out there. The next generation of Marxist thinkers, they took on the job of trying to build a real system out of them. And a major player here was a guy named Georgy Plekhanov, often called the father of Russian Marxism. He came up with a really fascinating way to think about art's job in society.
Plekhanov basically said that art has two modes, and which one it's in depends entirely on the political mood. So when artists feel hopeless, alienated, like they can't change anything, their art tends to become art for art's sake. It's beautiful, but it completely pulls back from social problems. But, and this is the key, when artists feel that real change is on the horizon, their art becomes utilitarian. It picks a side, it gets its hands dirty, and actively tries to change the world. And then, 1917. Theory slams right into reality with the Russian Revolution. All of a sudden, these academic debates weren't just for intellectuals anymore. They had life or death consequences. The questions became urgent. What is an artist's role in a brand new country? And just how much control should the government have over art? You can just feel the energy of this period. It was a total whirlwind. You have Lenin's early writings setting the stage, then the revolution itself completely changes the game. Then you see this fierce debate emerge with Trotsky arguing for artistic freedom, and it all leads up to the state finally stepping in and saying, this is the official art now, which was called socialist realism. Now, Lenin's position here is a little tricky, and it gets misunderstood all the time. He was for freedom of speech, generally, but he drew a very sharp line in the sand. He said, if you're going to call your work party literature, then it better be on the party's side. It has to be partisan. Now, he wasn't saying all art had to be that way, but that argument, well, it was later twisted to justify massive state control over all culture. But not everyone was on board with that. Not by a long shot. Leon Trotsky, another huge figure in the revolution, pushed back, and he pushed back hard. He said, look, the party's job isn't to command artists. It's to protect them, to help them. You can't dictate great art into existence. For him, truly revolutionary art had to be free to explore and to experiment. And right there, you see this fundamental clash of ideas right at the very heart of the revolution. So after the revolution, the debate shifts. Everyone kind of agrees that art should be realist, but what does that actually mean? This question kicked off one of the most famous intellectual showdowns in Marxist theory, a battle between two absolute giants, Georgy Lukács and Bertolt Brecht. Okay, so in one corner you have Lukács. He was the classicist. He looked back to the great realist novels of the 19th century and said, that's it. That's what we need. He believed art should give you this complete, unified picture of society, a totality, to show you the big historical forces moving underneath everything. He absolutely despised experimental modernism. He just saw it as chaotic and decadent. And in the other corner, you have Brecht. He was the total opposite. He was all about shaking things up.
For him, realism wasn't about a pretty, complete picture. It was about smashing things open to expose society's contradictions and get the audience fired up to do something about it. And Brecht's most famous invention to do this was something called the alienation effect. What he would do is use all these tricks, like having actors talk right to the audience or leaving the stage lights visible, to constantly remind people, hey, you're watching a play. The goal was to stop you from just getting lost in the story and emotionally connecting with the characters. He wanted to make you a critical observer, to make you lean forward and ask, wait, why is this happening? Why is society like this? He didn't want you to just feel. He wanted you to think, and then to act.
Now, while all these fiery debates are happening about state control and what art should look like, there's another thinker, an Italian Marxist named Antonio Gramsci, who's coming at this from a totally different angle. And get this, he's developing his ideas while locked away in one of Mussolini's prison cells. He wasn't focused on force. He was focused on culture.
Gramsci's huge, game-changing idea is a concept called hegemony. He argued that the ruling class doesn't just keep power with police and armies. That's the messy way. The smart way they rule is by making their own worldview, their own values, seem like the natural, normal, common sense way of seeing the world. It's a kind of leadership by consent, where everyone else just kind of goes along with it because it's presented as the only way things can be.
So for Gramsci, a real revolution wasn't about storming a palace. It had to be a culture war, a war of ideas. He said the working class needed to create its own thinkers, its own writers and artists, what he called organic intellectuals. Their job was to build a new story, a powerful alternative vision for how society could work. The goal was to create a new common sense that could go head-to-head with the dominant one and eventually replace it.
So when you step back and look at the whole journey, you can see how this all grew from just a few core ideas in Marx's work into this incredibly rich, complicated, and often contradictory way of thinking. It's a story filled with passionate arguments about freedom versus control, tradition versus experiment, and that ultimate question of whether you win a revolution with guns or with ideas.
Which brings us right back to that first question. Because if we accept this core idea that art and society are always connected, it leaves us with a pretty provocative thought for today. Think about the shows you binge watch, the music that's always on your playlist, the books everyone's talking about. What values are they selling as just common sense? What story are they telling us about our world, about power, and about ourselves, right here, right now?